You walk into the office Monday morning thinking competence matters. Hard work gets rewarded. Merit speaks for itself. But 3 months later, you watch the smooth-talking colleague who arrives late and leaves early get the promotion you deserved. You watch the boss's favorite get credit for your ideas. You watch politics crush performance every single time. And that's when you realize the brutal truth Machiavelli understood 5 centuries ago. The office isn't a meritocracy, it's a kingdom. And kingdoms aren't won by the most qualified. They're won by the most strategic. These aren't feel-good corporate mantras about teamwork and synergy. These are the 5 laws Machiavelli would use to dominate modern office politics. Laws that separate those who complain about unfairness from those who reshape it in their favor. Laws that turn the workplace from a battlefield you survive into a chessboard you control. Law 1. Never appear more competent than your superior. Here's what they don't teach you in business school. Your boss doesn't want to be impressed by you. They want to be validated by you. There's a difference. When you constantly outshine your superior, you're not building your career. You're building their insecurity. And insecure superiors don't promote threats. They eliminate them. Think about the last time someone made you feel stupid in a meeting. Did you think, wow, I should give them more responsibility? Or did you think, I need to watch this person? The answer reveals why your brilliance might be your biggest career mistake. Machiavelli understood this dynamic in Renaissance courts. The advisor who made the prince look wise became indispensable. The advisor who made the prince look ignorant became dead. The office version is less dramatic but equally brutal. You don't get fired. You get sidelined, excluded, passed over. Your competence becomes your ceiling. But here's the Machiavellian twist. You don't become less competent. You become strategically competent. You solve problems in ways that make your boss look insightful for assigning them to you. You present solutions that make them appear brilliant for recognizing the issue. You shine your light through them, not over them. Let's say you discover a major flaw in the quarterly strategy. The average person walks into their boss's office and says, "There's a problem with our approach. Congratulations. You just made your boss feel incompetent for not seeing it first." Now they're defensive. Now they're looking for reasons why your solution won't work. Now you're the person who creates problems instead of the person who anticipates opportunities. The Machiavellian approach is surgical. You plant seeds. You ask strategic questions in meetings. I've been thinking about something you mentioned last week about market positioning. What if we explored some alternative angles? Now your boss isn't being corrected. They're being consulted. Their wisdom led you to this insight. When the solution works, they were the visionary. When it fails, you were the dutiful executor. This isn't about being fake. It's about understanding that perception shapes reality in corporate hierarchies. Your boss's success becomes your success because successful bosses need trusted lieutenants. Threatening bosses replace problem subordinates. Watch how the most successful people in your office interact with leadership. They don't show off their intelligence. They reflect it back. They ask questions that let the boss provide brilliant answers. They present ideas as natural extensions of the boss's vision. They make their superiors feel like mentors, not competitors. The moment you make your boss look bad, even accidentally, you've triggered their survival instincts. And in corporate survival, your career becomes collateral damage. But when you consistently make them look good, you become their secret weapon. The person they can't succeed without. Law 2. Build invisible networks. Not obvious alliances. Office politics isn't about who you have lunch with. It's about who owes you favors when decisions get made behind closed doors. Most people focus on kissing up to power. But Machiavelli knew something more dangerous. The person who controls information controls outcomes. And information doesn't flow through org charts. It flows through invisible networks. You see colleagues building obvious alliances. They sit with the same people in meetings. They socialize with their department. They play office politics like high school cliques. And that's exactly why they lose. Because obvious alliances create obvious enemies. Visible loyalty breeds visible opposition. And when the power shifts, and it always does, your allegiances become your weaknesses. The Machiavellian operates differently. They build webs, not walls. They cultivate connections across departments, levels, and functions. The administrative assistant who schedules executive meetings. The IT person who sees all email traffic. The finance analyst who knows which projects get budget cuts. These aren't power lunches. These are intelligence networks. Here's how it works in practice. You don't just help people in your department. You solve problems for people who can't obviously help you back. You assist the operations manager with a vendor issue. You share useful information with someone in marketing. You offer insights to a peer in a completely different division. Most people think this is wasted effort because there's no immediate payoff. But Machiavelli understood compound influence. Every favor becomes a future asset. Every problem you solve creates a future ally. Every connection you build becomes a future pathway. 6 months later, that operations manager you helped is in a budget meeting where your project gets discussed. That marketing contact you assisted mentions your name to their VP. That cross-divisional peer recommends you for a task force. Suddenly, you have advocates in rooms you've never entered, influence in decisions you're not involved in, support from directions nobody expects. The beautiful thing about invisible networks is their durability. When office politics shift, when leadership changes, when departments get restructured, your visible alliances might crumble, but your invisible network adapts. Because it's based on mutual value, not mutual proximity. It's built on what you've done for people, not who you've been seen with. Start mapping your organization's real power structure, not the official hierarchy. The influence network. Who does the CEO actually listen to? Which assistant controls access? Which middle managers shape decisions? Who are the informal opinion leaders in each department? These are your network targets. Not because you're manipulating them, because you're positioning yourself to create value for them. Remember, in Machiavellian terms, favors are currency. The person who has done favors for everyone has influence with everyone. And in office politics, influence matters more than authority. Because authority is what's written on your business card. Influence is what happens when business cards don't matter. Law 3. Control the narrative. Don't chase credit. You finish a project that saves the company $50,000. The presentation goes perfectly. The client is thrilled. Everyone knows you led the effort. But somehow, 3 months later, when the story gets told in leadership meetings, your role has become supporting cast. Your manager presents it as a team effort. The department head takes strategic credit. The narrative shifted while you were celebrating the work. This is why Machiavelli would tell you that doing good work is only half the battle. The other half is controlling how that work gets remembered, discussed, and credited. Most people think credit flows naturally to those who deserve it. But credit flows to those who shape the story. And in office politics, the story is everything. Here's the brutal reality. Nobody remembers the details of your accomplishments 6 months later. They remember the story they were told about your accomplishments. If you don't control that story, someone else will. And their version probably won't cast you as the hero. The Machiavellian approach isn't about stealing credit or self-promotion. It's about narrative architecture. You build the story while the accomplishment is happening, not after it's finished. You document the process, not just the outcome. You create touchpoints that naturally position your role. You make your contributions visible to decision makers before anyone has a chance to rewrite history. Let's break down how this works tactically. During the project, you send strategic updates to stakeholders, not to micromanage or show off, to establish your ownership of the process. Here's where we are on the client optimization project. Next week, I'll be presenting the revised framework to the executive team. Simple, professional. But it plants you at the center of the narrative. You also anticipate the inevitable. Someone will try to dilute your contribution. Your manager will want to share credit with the team. The department head will want to frame it as organizational success. Instead of fighting this after the fact, you architect it from the beginning. You position yourself as the natural spokesperson. You become the person others defer to when the story gets told, because you've established yourself as the subject matter expert. There's an even more advanced move. You create documentation that becomes the official record, the project retrospective, the case study, the lessons learned presentation. When you control the documentation, you control how future conversations reference the accomplishment. You're not manipulating the truth. You're ensuring the truth gets preserved in its full context. But here's where it gets really Machiavellian. You don't just control the narrative about your successes. You shape the narrative about your setbacks. Because in office politics, how failure gets explained matters more than whether failure happened. The person who controls the failure narrative controls whether it damages their reputation or enhances their learning story. When something goes wrong, and something always goes wrong, most people go into defensive mode. They explain circumstances. They distribute blame. They justify decisions. But the Machiavellian already has the counter-narrative ready. Not excuses, context, not blame shifting. Learning insights, not defensive explanations. Strategic transparency about challenges and responses. The goal isn't to avoid all criticism. It's to ensure that when criticism comes, you've already shaped the framework for how it gets interpreted. Because the person who defines the terms of the debate usually wins the debate. Law 4. Make others dependent on your expertise. Job security isn't about being indispensable. It's about being irreplaceable. There's a difference. Indispensable people are trapped by their importance. Irreplaceable people are elevated by their uniqueness. And in office politics, the person everyone needs but cannot duplicate holds the most leverage. Machiavelli understood this in political contexts. The advisor who knew military strategy was useful. The advisor who knew everyone's secrets was irreplaceable. The person with unique access, specialized knowledge, or exclusive relationships could survive regime changes that destroyed everyone else. Modern offices operate by the same logic. Most people try to become valuable through hard work. They take on more responsibilities. They volunteer for difficult assignments. They demonstrate reliability and competence. And while these traits matter, they don't create leverage. Because hard workers can be replaced by other hard workers. Reliable people can be substituted with equally reliable people. Competence, unless it's highly specialized, is surprisingly common. The Machiavellian approach is different. Instead of becoming generally valuable, you become specifically irreplaceable. You develop expertise that others need but cannot easily acquire. You build relationships that others require but cannot easily replicate. You position yourself as the bridge between critical functions, the translator between important groups, or the source for essential information. Here's how this looks in practice. Instead of just being good at your job, you become the expert in something adjacent to your job that everyone else finds challenging. Maybe you master the complex software system that integrates with multiple departments. Maybe you develop deep knowledge of regulatory requirements that affect multiple teams. Maybe you build relationships with key vendors, clients, or external partners that others rely on but cannot easily access. The key is choosing expertise that creates natural dependency. Not dependency that comes from hoarding information or creating artificial scarcity. Dependency that comes from investing in capabilities others avoid because they're too complex, too time-consuming, or too specialized to be worth their individual effort. Take the example of data analysis in most organizations. Everyone knows data matters, but most people avoid becoming truly skilled at advanced data analysis because it requires technical learning and ongoing practice. If you develop genuine expertise in transforming raw organizational data into strategic insights, you become irreplaceable not because you're gatekeeping information, but because you're providing a service others cannot efficiently replicate. Or consider regulatory compliance in highly regulated industries. Most people see compliance as bureaucratic overhead, but the person who truly understands regulatory requirements becomes invaluable when new regulations emerge, when audits happen, when strategic decisions need compliance input. They're not just following rules. They're translating complex regulatory landscapes into practical business guidance. The most sophisticated version of this law involves becoming a connector. You develop relationships and knowledge that allow you to bridge gaps others cannot. You understand both the technical and business sides of issues. You can translate between departments that normally miscommunicate. You know how to navigate both internal politics and external partnerships. You become irreplaceable not for what you know, but for how you help others navigate what they need. But there's a crucial balance. The person who hoards expertise to create artificial dependency eventually gets routed around. The person who shares expertise while maintaining their position as the primary source creates sustainable leverage. You teach others enough to appreciate your value, but not enough to replace your necessity. When organizational changes happen, when budgets get cut, when teams get restructured, the people who survive are those who cannot be easily replaced. Not because they're playing political games, but because they've positioned themselves as essential bridges in the organizational ecosystem. Law 5. Time your moves to power transitions. The biggest career leaps don't happen during stable periods. They happen during chaos. When leadership changes, when companies reorganize, when market conditions force strategic shifts. Most people see these transitions as threatening periods to survive, but Machiavelli saw them as opportunity windows to exploit. Because when power structures shift, new alliances form. And the people who position themselves correctly during the transition emerge stronger when the dust settles. Here's what most people do during organizational change. They keep their heads down. They wait to see which way the wind blows. They try to maintain the status quo and hope their current position survives the upheaval. This is exactly backwards, because maintaining the status quo during power transitions guarantees you'll be left behind when new structures emerge. The Machiavellian reads the signals early and positions accordingly. They identify rising power before it's obvious. They build relationships with emerging leaders before those leaders have clear authority. They align themselves with organizational directions before those directions become mandates. They don't wait for change to happen to them. They anticipate change and shape their position within it. Let's break down how this works practically. A new executive joins the organization. Most people wait to see what this person will do before they decide how to interact with them. The Machiavellian studies the new executive's background, previous accomplishments, and likely priorities. Then they find ways to create value aligned with what this person will probably want to achieve. Not brown-nosing. Strategic positioning. Maybe the new executive has a history of digital transformation initiatives. You start developing expertise in digital processes within your current role. Maybe they're known for operational efficiency. You identify process improvements in your area and document potential solutions. Maybe they focus on customer experience. You gather insights about customer pain points that relate to your function. The goal isn't to predict exactly what will happen. It's to position yourself as someone who can contribute to likely scenarios. When the new executive starts implementing their vision, you're already aligned and prepared. When they need people who understand their priorities, you've demonstrated relevant capabilities. When they form their inner circle, you're a logical choice. This same principle applies to broader organizational changes. Market downturns, acquisitions, technology disruptions, regulatory changes, each creates power vacuums and opportunities for repositioning. While others react defensively, the Machiavellian acts strategically. During market downturns, everyone focuses on cost-cutting and survival. The strategic person focuses on efficiency improvements and revenue opportunities that position them as essential during recovery. During acquisitions, everyone worries about redundancy and cultural fit. The strategic person focuses on becoming a bridge between organizations and understanding synergy opportunities. The most advanced version of this law involves creating beneficial transitions. Not manipulating outcomes, but identifying organizational inefficiencies or opportunities and positioning yourself as part of the solution. You become the person who sees around corners and helps the organization navigate what's coming. For example, if you recognize that your company will eventually need to address a regulatory change, technological shift, or market evolution, you start building expertise and relationships in that area before it becomes an organizational priority. When the organization finally acknowledges the need, you're already the obvious person to lead the response. There's a psychological element here that Machiavelli understood deeply. People trust those who demonstrate foresight. The person who anticipated change and prepared for it seems more capable than the person who reacts to change after it happens. This perception creates opportunities for advancement that go beyond the immediate transition, but timing matters crucially. Move too early, and you look like you're abandoning your current responsibilities. Move too late, and the opportunities have been claimed by others. The sweet spot is identifying transitions while they're developing but before they're obvious to everyone else. The person who masters transition timing doesn't just survive organizational change. They use organizational change as a career accelerator. Because in the chaos of power transitions, merit, politics, and opportunity intersect in ways that create possibilities for dramatic advancement. The integration, becoming politically untouchable. These 5 laws don't operate in isolation. They compound. The person who never outshines their superior builds trust that creates opportunities to demonstrate specialized expertise. The person who builds invisible networks gains early information about power transitions. The person who controls narratives shapes how their strategic positioning gets interpreted by emerging leaders. Together, these laws create what Machiavelli would recognize as political immunity. Not the immunity of someone who avoids office politics. The immunity of someone who operates so skillfully within office politics that they become untouchable by its normal dynamics. Most people experience office politics as something that happens to them. Rumors that damage their reputation, decisions made without their input, credit that gets redirected to others, reorganizations that threaten their position. They're reactive players in games other people design, but the person who masters these 5 laws flips the dynamic. They become someone office politics happens around, not to. Their reputation is protected by networks they've built. Their expertise makes them essential during transitions. Their narrative control prevents others from rewriting their contributions. Their strategic positioning with power means they're included in rather than subjected to important decisions. This isn't about becoming manipulative or political in negative ways. It's about understanding that organizations are human systems, and human systems operate according to psychological and social dynamics. You can pretend those dynamics don't exist and become their victim, or you can understand those dynamics and use them strategically. The choice is simple. You can complain about office politics being unfair, or you can learn to play office politics more skillfully than those who've been using them against you. Machiavelli would tell you that fairness is a luxury of those who hold power, and power, in organizational contexts, goes to those who understand the real rules of the game. These aren't the rules they teach in business school or put in employee handbooks. These are the rules that determine who actually gets promoted, whose ideas actually get implemented, and whose careers actually advance. The 5 laws that separate those who understand power from those who wonder why competence isn't enough. Because in the end, office politics isn't about politics. It's about understanding human nature in organizational contexts. And human nature, as Machiavelli observed 500 years ago, remains remarkably consistent. The names change, the technology evolves, but the fundamental dynamics of influence, perception, and strategic positioning remain the same. Master these laws, and you stop being a victim of office politics. You become a virtuoso of organizational influence. Not because you've become manipulative, but because you've become strategic. Not because you've abandoned principles, but because you've learned to advance your principles effectively. That's the difference between those who survive office politics and those who thrive within them. Survival is reactive. Thriving is strategic. And strategy, as Machiavelli knew, is what separates those who complain about the game from those who reshape it in their favor.